Okay, good morning.
Good afternoon, and welcome.
Afternoon, and welcome to the special edition of the Administrative Practices Committee on June 22nd here in the Grass Valley offices. Today we are conducting this Administrative Practices Committee meeting by Zoom. Chris, how many people do we have on the call?
We have, let's see, one attendee, fellow director.
Okay.
Director Peters.
Okay.
And, our consultant and MA.
Okay, fantastic.
Four total.
Great. Well, those of you who are in the public, you will press *9 to raise your hand, and *9 will lower your hand again. And we will go ahead and begin this item, number 1, in reviewing the alternative insurance package. And I will be presenting this item, and I will hand it over to our consultant in order to give his PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go from there. So, ask questions along the way, if you have them, either of myself or of oh my goodness, why am I, Alan. I've been on the phone daily with Alan for the last 2.5 months.
Right.
I apologize, Alan.
That's okay.
Asking questions as we go forth or move forward. So today we are here in order to receive an update to the alternative insurance package, kind of a continuation of what we brought forth to the APC on the May 5th meeting, 2020. We are thankful that we have had the month of June to continue finding new carriers and new insurance quotes. We were running up against a deadline which we thought was going to be at the 1st of June. If you recall, we sent a notice of intent to withdraw to SDRMA after we had received notification of 2 things. Well, the first thing was that the district, who has and maintains and operates roughly 12 miles of power, overhead electrical power line, SDRMA was dropping that line item completely of all coverage, not just NIDs, but other municipalities and coverages that they carry. So it was a difficult business decision, I think, for SDRMA to make this choice. However, they did so. That prompted us to begin a process of going forth and finding a consultant broker who would then go out and find new insurance coverage for us and the district, covering a more comprehensive process. We have been with SDRMA since 2008, covering both our property and liability insurance as well as our workers' compensation. We've had a great relationship with SDRMA over the years. However, this instance of dropping our overhead electrical lines really became a kick in the pants, I think, if you will, to begin the search again. So it's been over a decade since that I'm aware of, that we've actually gone out and taken a look at new insurance carriers, new opportunities, what's changed in the insurance market, what are the lines of coverages that we have and that we don't have. So there was a lot of back and forth. We found Alan Tyler of Gallagher Insurance Services, brokerage services, who has worked tirelessly since the last couple months on helping us define what the needs are, what our current existing structure is, helping me specifically sort of walk through the world of insurance, which, by the way, is no small undertaking.
Especially when you look at all of this.
When you look at all of this. And so I am thankful to bring this to you today with a hopeful recommendation to the Board of Directors. However, I do recognize that as a special APC meeting, we do have a Board of Directors meeting on Wednesday in 2 days, which this item is also on the packet. I could not specify in the staff report that this is a recommendation of the APC because we don't have enough time. So I appreciate the concern that this is a lot of information, this is a lot of money, this is a lot of data, and to bring it upon you and the board in such a short time, to have it turned around with a recommendation and an authorization in such a short order is a difficult stretch for staff. However, given the fact that we had zero time frame in which to operate in, we were given this information by SCRMA, I believe it was in January? February.
It was February, March.
It was late February.
Yeah.
So we've been struggling to get this forth, and you throw a pandemic on the top of it,
Right.
getting all the information that we possibly can to date with all of the complexities of the district activities and sources of assets. Mostly the hydroelectric portion of our business was very scrutinized by the agencies that Alan will talk about today. Kian and his hydro team stepped up and answered some pretty tough questions, went through a lot of communication with some of these insurance carriers, trying to get all the information that they possibly could. So we acknowledge that this is a lot of information, really quick, all at once to make a decision. However, I do hope that you appreciate the fact that we've been working as fast as we can to get you the information. A lot of times this stuff takes a year to put together. We put it together in 2 months. We believe that it's comprehensive and very well organized. Alan has done a fantastic job. Staff believes that we will increase our services from insurance. We will increase the value of our insurance carriers. There was a lot of components to some of these carriers that we're going to get additional services for that aren't necessarily reflected there, like consulting, and you've seen in the packet that already both our safety department and our hydroelectric department have had some consultation with Gallagher and their employees on some. One, I think, Alan, was a transformer placement, and kind of looking at that, they did some cost engineering analysis around it on just to see their services, and another was through our safety department, through some risk analysis engineering, really quick, high-level stuff. But it gave us a taste of some of the brokerage services that Gallagher can provide, as well as some of the carriers. And so with that, I think I will open it up to Alan to go through the presentation and to dive deep into some of the coverage components, some of the questions you just had for me this morning. I hope we can answer. That's going to be a hard one, but we can.
Well, I tried to get it to you with enough time.
No, I know.
I figured maybe, Tyler could maybe get it.
We can cover that.
Okay, thank you.
So, with that, Alan, can I move the floor to you, and we'll begin the presentation?
Great, thank you. Chris, can you put there we go. Okay, thank you. So just a cover page here, but briefly, we're presenting the insurance alternatives. So let's just jump to the next slide, please. So here's just a little background on me, on Daniel Lemus in my office, who I work really closely with. You might have a chance to see this, and I'll skip through some of it, but I've worked with public water and power clients for over 30 years. You'll see in a page or two a brief list of current clients, but this is a big part of my career, and I'm really fortunate to have the opportunity to have gone to work for you guys. Daniel Lemus in my office is my right-hand person. He's very strong. He has some client-facing responsibilities and then also a lot of insurance company-facing responsibilities. We've had 3 calls this morning just on utility-related matters for a July 1 renewal, a call with underwriters in London, and Daniel and I work side by side. And so he's a name that a person that Greg will get to know. could you go to the next slide, please? So a couple of other people on the team. John Muno is our Director of Engineering Services. Began his career at Georgia Power as a nuclear fire protection engineer. He served on a number of industry panels as an advisor on property protection issues. John was the person that worked with your staff on the placement of the combi transformer, and without going on and on, the question was how much oil is in the transformer and is the distance allowed, and John basically did the calculation that could be used as your design basis. Linda Pierce is an attorney. She is on our staff, and Linda is a resource that we hope, frankly, you won't need to work with, because Linda advocates when we have complex liability claims and we just need another set of eyes from an attorney on how things are going. But she is on the team. She's not just a person who's, works for Gallagher somewhere. She knows she's on the team. She's been engaged. Will Valdries is a safety consultant, and we've already had a call with your safety staff and Will, just for an introduction and an orientation, but Will be involved with training support and safety related matters for workers' compensation. You could go to the next slide, please. So we had objectives, and I've really actually just touched on them all. Engineering review of hydroelectric plant maintenance and recommendations. We will be having engineering visits from insurance companies. Should we, I apologize, directors. Should we be fortunate to be chosen to go ahead and place coverage for you, we would be having visits with engineers. Engineers could make recommendations, and then our engineering staff can help either interpret those recommendations, propose alternatives if recommendations are expensive, and it's a process we like to be part of. So I introduced John Muno and Will Valdries earlier. So can I go to the next slide, please? So here's a brief splash page of current water and power utility clients. You can see a number of your neighbors there. And again, I began handling work for Imperial Irrigation District over 30 years, but Modesto and Turlock, I have several decade experiences with. Kings River, similarly, Tridam, City of Glendale. So that's just to give you a character of the kind of work we do on a day-to-day basis in terms of the same issues that you guys will encounter. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here is my perspective on your current state as the challenge came to us. You've had a long relationship with SDRMA and might not have been motivated to, do the work to look around if it hadn't been kind of shoved at you. But here you are. Getting to know your staff, I strongly believe that a lot of your happiness with SDRMA is a statement about the engagement and attention that your staff plays to these matters. I am extremely impressed with the team that you have. And so I think some of the satisfaction with SDRMA is that you all go out of your way to take advantage of all services that are available to you, regardless of the supplier. So I'm not trying to say that to denigrate anything that SDRMA brings to the table, but I think it bears notice that I know you're going to take advantage of resources that are available to you. Okay, on the third point there, just kind of touching on what was the original challenge, SDRMA made the business decision not to offer the coverage for your overhead power. A unseparable tag along to that is that means no wildfire coverage, because if you don't have coverage for anything arising out of power lines, a wildfire arising out of your power lines will not be covered. So we've as Greg said, worked a tremendous amount of time. Your staff has been tireless and prompt and detailed responding to me, and I believe we've addressed all of the coverage issues, and I'm really pleased with the proposals that we're bringing to you. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so again, talking about our objectives, we obviously, the economics of any program are of high importance. In terms of our approach to the market, rather than a program covering all of your exposures, because with the exception of, let's say, SDRMA, we really find better results by looking at each line of coverage and then finding the best underwriter by line. So we have several different policies. That should not be seen as having to cobble things together. That should be seen as having the best in class for each line of business. We'll touch on, when we do the deep dive, a number of coverage improvements beyond the overhead electrical. We've managed to just make sure we've included in the program the best of what you like. Target resources, a training program that your safety staff really uses as their kind of operating system is going to be preserved. We're committed to an extremely high level of professional support with engineering and claims staff. And then we have some other, just other resources as value added that you might not choose a program for, but we think are going to be very valuable to you. And we think we succeeded with all of those that we were trying for. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so touching on the details of unbundling coverage of best of line by class. So for the liability and non-hydro property, the program that we're presenting is managed by a program manager called Glatfelter. They're the largest manager in the country of a program for water districts of all kinds. So their coverages are designed to meet your needs. So for instance, there's air and emissions coverage for water treatment operations. They're not afraid of treated water exposures. They're not afraid of the inverse condemnation exposures that you face. So excellent program. They know exactly what your exposures are and not afraid of them. You have $21 million of coverage. You might be familiar with this. You currently have 10 million with SDRMA and then 11 million in a layer above that. We are in our proposal, it's similar. The Glatfelter program has $11 million limits, and then the 10 million above that, again, it's in a public entity specialty excess liability insurance program. And again, it's also with an insurance company that has a water entity program. In this case, Glatfelter was more competitive than Allied World. But again, that higher limit is with a public entity specialty program designed for your needs. For the machinery break, I'm sorry, was there a question?
This is Director Peck. I have a question about that. So the $10 million over the top, would that be similar in structure to, say, a general umbrella, like I have an umbrella in addition to my homeowners and all those things? Is that a similar kind of idea?
It's exactly, it's not similar, it's exactly that. So in liability coverages in general, the insurance industry is very tradition bound because they kind of like knowing how things work, and there are certain structures that the industry kind of can rely on as a place to start. So you have 3 layers in your liability insurance program in our proposals. There's a $1 million layer, and then a $10 million layer on top of that, and then a $10 million layer on top of that. $21 million is not a number that's just made up. It's required by your large generator interconnection agreements. It's a very standard limit nationwide, kind of following CAL-ISO and then CAL-ISO following FERC.
Okay, thank you. And then the Allied World, who is essentially doing the umbrella in my lingo,
Right.
Are they a AAA rated company? Can you talk about the ratings of these companies as you go through your presentation?
Yes, we do not do business with companies that are not A-rated. So yes, these are all A-rated companies.
Okay. Thank you.
There's kind of an industry standard in umbrella layers that A minus still is determined as, you know, excellent by AM Best. So A minus is considered fine, but the Gladfelter AIG program is A plus, and Allied World is also A plus.
Good.
The rankings go A plus plus, A plus, A minus, B plus plus. Okay, so and then for the hydro machinery breakdown, again, we are working with specialty underwriters for those lines of business, and this is an interesting coverage. So, you know, if you want car insurance on an F-150 pickup, it's, you know, every F-150 is pretty much the same as any other F-150, and then who are the drivers, and an insurance company just has rates. Well, for a power generation risk, there are no standards. You know, it's different kinds of machinery, different sizes, different types of transformers, different technologies, and especially if you look at the broader sense beyond hydro, but to combustion turbines, solar. So underwriters that are quoting coverage for the machinery breakdown and property for hydroelectric have engineers on staff that evaluate submissions, then the underwriters work on it, and generally a department only works on global energy. And those are the companies we went to. So Zurich Global Energy, again, a German-based carrier. We work with their office in New York City. Associated Electric and Gas Insurance Services, Aegis, is an insurance company owned by its members, A-rated. And so they are in the property program. Munich Re, again, a German carrier. We work with their US office. And then we'd be using, for a small portion of the coverage, underwriters at Lloyd's. So you see those percentages there. And, you know, on liability, the tradition is we do layers. We have the $1 million layer, the $10 million layer, and then the $10 million layer on top of that. With property, it's like slices. So of your coverage, of any, let's say there's a $5 million loss, you know, Zurich has 35% of it, Aegis would have 35%, Munich 20%, and London 10%. And that's the tradition, and that's what the industry is used to providing.
Well, you spread the risk.
It's exactly, it's their way of spreading the risk, and it just sliced the other direction than liability is.
Does that apply, Alan, this is Director Beerwagen. I'm not being familiar with this percentage of insurance. That's a little baffling to me, but you answered the first part of the question. I was going the direction that each of these companies offered a different specialty that we were looking for, or just spreading the risk?
So of those 4 in the property program, that's a matter of spreading the risk.
Okay.
We would have been successful if, let's say, Zurich said, no, we'll do 45, and he just said, we'll do 50, and we only then needed 5% from London. Their percentages are determined by their review of your generating equipment, their estimate of what they think the largest loss might be, and then based on that, they're willing to take a certain position. So just, again, kind of what's their maximum exposure, and so then based on that, they'll take a certain percent of the total values.
Okay, so if there is a claim, then I assume they'll have to get together and hash that all out?
So, yeah, so it's a great question. So what we do is Gallagher identifies an adjuster that we know and trust as an independent adjuster. My recommendation is we use a gentleman named Mark Bruaski, and then he has a partner, Ezekiel Martinez, who do power generation accounts, they're adjusting 2 power generation losses for clients of ours currently, one a combustion turbine breakdown and one a transformer fire. They absolutely know their business. They're very responsive. So we would assign that one adjuster, and all of these insurance companies have agreed to that adjuster. So there would be one point of contact, but when it actually came down to getting checks, we would have a check from Zurich, a check from Aegis, a check from Munich Re, and a check from London. But it may sound like complicated, but that's the way the property market operates for all power generation risks, and claims are being paid every day.
I have another question. Okay. So on the hydro side, do we also get coverages for income loss? Say the power plant goes down and whatever, fire, and we're losing income every day because we're not generating. Is there income loss in here?
That's a difficult coverage. We don't have loss of income now. You didn't have loss of income for hydroelectric in the prior program. So one issue we're going to talk about is, I'll get ahead of myself a little bit, is something lacking from how SDRMA did their property coverage is, while you have great testing results for your transformers, for your generators, the industry is used to seeing a report from, in this case, it would be Zurich. If it was printed, it would probably be 50 pages, and it would talk about all the plants, all the fire protection, maintenance regimes. It would be a very comprehensive report. And underwriters are used to seeing something like that. Just the way the SDRMA program was structured, that's just hasn't been happening. So it made the marketing process really difficult. But as we get through this first year and we have reports from Zurich, you have an opportunity to respond. I am confident we'll have opportunities to expand the program to bring loss of generation into coverage.
Okay, and then is that specific to fire? Because, you know, I see that the coverage is hydro machinery breakdown, which can happen for any number of reasons.
Right.
Unrelated to fire.
Exactly. So
we have no loss of income coverage whatsoever, even if it's only a machinery breakdown, and we didn't have it with SDRMA either, is that right?
Correct. So it's
Loss of income, yeah.
Yeah. So the claims would be a shaft or a blade breaking in the wheels of, that are actually being pushed by the power, the generator, a transformer failure. Those are all considered machinery breakdown losses. And then for fire, your typical exposures on the property coverages might be a lubrication oil fire if something overheats, or sometimes you have a transformer fire. Usually they just fail.
Okay. So it's just clear, there is no loss of income no matter what kind of loss we have at this time, and it's something we can explore further in the future if we want.
Correct. Yes, correct.
As we move forward with the carrier coverages and them understanding our processes and our machinery a lot better, then we can, then I think, Alan, would that be right? Then we can seek additional coverage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did we have that before?
No, yeah,
Okay.
we did not.
We did not. Okay. That's it to me.
I know, I would have thought we would have. It's like,
Well, I
wait a
never would have thought, so.
minute.
I'm just looking at fire and breakdown.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of like, we're losing when it's down.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that answer. I guess
Can you go,
together.
directors, are you ready for me to go to the next slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this slide shows comparisons of coverage, kind of mostly geared as like summary of the coverages, but including the price points. And I will walk through them. So the first line, I'm calling the package program. So that includes property, including machinery breakdown for non-hydroelectric. So again, the loss there might be a fire at one of your buildings, but it also could be machinery breakdown to pumps, to equipment at a water treatment plant. So and non-hydroelectric. So the SDRMA price at that program was $882,000. Well, would be $882,000. The package program that we're presenting with the Glatfelter program insured by AIG is $741,956. The hydroelectric equipment was included in that SDRMA number, and we have again marketed that as a separate placement, and so you see 535,000 plus some taxes. So on that line, you know, the lines vary where, you know, the program we're presenting might be more expensive on some lines and then less expensive on other lines. So we want to pay attention to the individual lines, but I think your decision point is the bottom line. But so again, that hydroelectric machinery breakdown, 535,000. Again, there's a service that's absolutely critical. The market expects it, and we have carriers that we went to that declined to quote just because there is not an insurance company prepared engineering report. So in this case, Zurich's engineers would do that work. I like the Zurich engineer. We've done one in particular. He's done engineering for other like neighbors of yours with hydroelectric generation. And I've been happy with the work they've done. If it had happened that it was possible to piece things together, or if you had just decided to go to SDRMA, my recommendation is that it would be critical to arrange an outside engineering review. There are independent companies that do it. And so I just put in the line here a budget number because I would just, that would be very important. Okay, next one. Yes.
Alan, can I interject really quick while you're on that point? I just want to remind the director, this is something that, you know, as we went through this quoting process, many of these carriers, and Alan just said it, would refuse to quote us because we're selling a car that nobody's seen, right? We're telling them, we're showing them pictures, and we're telling them what it's like, but they've never seen it, they've never touched it, and so this report that he's received a quote from Zurich to do is $38,000. As we move through the year, we put this into place. I've spoken with our Ken and Hydroelectric to do something such as this, if we move forward with this package, so that by the time we're re-quoting for our program next year, we have a solid engineering report for all of these, and for a $38,000 price tag for all of our hydroelectric facilities.
That's really inexpensive to me.
Is given a pretty low cost for the potential benefit that we could get in future years in terms of package price.
So I would expect, I'm sorry, Greg, interrupted.
If I misrepresented that, Alan, please feel free to correct me.
No, you said it exactly right. And I just want to comment that I would expect this cost would be lower in future years. And the reason is it's really valuable to have a baseline report that's very broad. But then in future years, let's say you might have the engineer go to Chicago Park and Combi, but you wouldn't have to go do all the plants all over again every year. So you would have risk engineering every year, but the cost might be lower because you might cycle through different plants just because a lot of things aren't going to change, right?
Correct.
Like your well, you get a well test and go.
Yeah.
And then the 5 engineers all that much.
Yes.
Okay, general liability coverage, that was the coverage where the overhead electrical issue came up with SDRMA. But in working on quotes, working on options, we've got a number of other improvements that I think are really valuable and important coverages that we think really need to be called out. So overhead electrical, again, going forward with SDRMA, not covered at all. In our proposal, we've got $11 million of liability coverage with the Gladfelter program for overhead electrical, and it's in the excess liability. That 10 million excess of 11 includes the overhead electrical also. So you have to go from no coverage to 21 million. Similarly on wildfire, from no coverage to 21 million. The SDRMA inverse condemnation is a big exposure for you. It's another one that comes into wildfire, but there's all sorts of other losses that that can arise out of an inverse condemnation claim. Are you familiar with the topic? If you are, I'm not trying to speak down to you. Yeah. Okay. So the idea is you've taken property by damaging it, and the plaintiff doesn't have to prove negligence. So again, SDRMA has $1 million of inverse condemnation coverage, but it's shared with all SDRMA members. So you may not have all of that available to you. Again, you have $21 million of that in the proposals we have in front of you. Failure to supply water, number of claims over the years, especially, let's say the last 7 or 8 years, against water agencies for failure to supply water. The textbook claim is fire department shows up, opens the hydrant, and it's dry. And building burns down. So with SDRMA, you have a limited amount of coverage, and the problem that led to the hydrant being dry has to arise out of damage to your property. So your pumping system has to, let's just say it had to burned up in the same fire. So, the hydrant's dry. The Gladfelter program doesn't have that limitation. So it just could be that, your PG&E's turned the power off to you and you didn't have enough fuel in the backup generator, and you did, things are always unthinkable when you have the loss, right? So it doesn't require that direct damage to your property. Pollution coverage, crime coverage, embezzlement, your mobile equipment, cyber coverage, I'll touch on those later, really all included. The excess liability, 10 million excess of 10 million. Again, I'm really happy with the proposal that we got. The coverage is, the price is about half with much broader coverage. Similarly, workers' compensation, I think we're gonna have an excellent service platform, keeping the target solution service, but we've found some significant savings there. So bottom line, when you look at all the coverages, we're about, we meaning the collection of proposals I'm presenting to you, about, let's call it $85,000 higher than the SDRMA program.
What is target solution service? So,
Okay. Yeah, take that, Greg.
It is a program that our safety department has been using for maybe 8 years or so. It was a program included in the SDRMA package that came with the program, and it helps track our certifications and training regimens that all of our staff need to do. So it tracks who's done first aid, who's done backhoe certification, who's received training on fire extinguishers, who's received fall protection training, and who's up for recertification. So it's our CMMS, if you will, of the safety department for tracking our certifications for all of our staff, tracks water operations folks and their certification structure. So it's this ongoing dynamic program that our safety staff are well versed, and so are the rest of our staff. And like Alan said, that early on when we did a consultation or a conference with the safety staff, that was paramount. It's a decade worth of records that we don't necessarily own, but this organization does, and so we need to keep it going, and they use it quite frequently all the time.
So connect me, I'm disconnected between having insurance coverage for that and actually doing it.
So Alan added it in here, only because at the end of the day, it will be its own, it's essentially, it's a software program, right? It's not an insurance-related activity. We're only including it in here in relation to the whole insurance package because it was included in SDRMA's $882,000.
So you're looking at apples for apples.
Yeah. It's part of the package, and so we just wanted to make sure that we incorporate it into this conversation, so we didn't lose. It is an additional $12,000 for the district to have that package for all 200 employees to track our certifications, but it's not, it's not an insurance program.
Right. So it adds a layer of I just had to run through my tongue. Validity, shall I say, to her, or proof if we need it. We have that resource.
100%. It tracks. We have many employees that have certifications that come due, annual renewals. Yeah, every 2 or 3 years there's a renewal for something. This tracks that. It gives us ticklers every 6 months in advance, and it says, okay, schedule this list of employees for this training, and then you'll be kept up to date with our OSHA requirements and with our certification requirements. So it's a tracking mechanism.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, and it's much cheaper than hiring a full-time person with benefits to keep track of all that. That would be your alternative.
100%.
Yeah. So this is really a pretty good.
Yeah. It's a great program.
For the money. Alan, I'm curious why, when you look at these workers' comp numbers between SDRMA and what Glatfelter is offering, that's pretty dramatic difference in premium. What do you account for why that's so much lower?
Well, the main difference is that SDRMA has their own, so there's a number called an experience modification, and for an insured employer,
Yeah, I know.
the state tracks that and publishes it. So SDRMA, as its own program, has its own experience modification factor, and the base rates were not that far off, but SDRMA ended up calculating a pretty high experience mod for you just based on how they value some of the losses. And so that's the main explanation.
It's by classification code of an employee, is that right, Alan?
Yeah, the short version is that based on your payroll, there would be certain expected losses. Someone with 10 times your payroll would probably have, let's say, 10 times your losses or something close to that. And then your own claims are compared to that expected losses. And you just get a quotient, 80% meaning you're 20% better than what's expected, 130%, you're 30% worse than what's expected.
Okay, I got it. So we're actually only being charged what's real for this district versus in a larger pool where some people may not be as attendant to safety or whatever, right?
Yes.
That was an interesting thing I thought.
I want to touch on the target solutions thing. I know you want to move on, but I made a comment in one of my opening slides that I felt that a lot of your satisfaction with SDRMA was based on your staff's use of available resources. So this number, $12,005, obviously when you have an odd $5, it's not a guess, that's an actual quote from Target Solutions. And I kind of ran that down and getting that together because after the first conversations with your safety department, I just told Greg, I said, Greg, we have to find a way to keep that. It's just too important to you. So the Target Solutions salesperson, in going through your files, said that he is not aware of another Target Solutions client using their system as fully as you guys do. It's really, you're doing a tremendous job, and that just makes it that much more important to keep. So if one of your employees is, injured by a forklift driver by another employee, and OSHA shows up and they say, hey, show me where these guys were trained on forklift operation, you could dial that up in probably a minute in that Target Solutions database. So you're using it really well.
I can see it adds a great deal of value to our program.
And does it play into the comp insurance, modifications?
Yeah, that was my question too.
Is it used for us and against us? Or could it be used for us?
It doesn't fit into the formula. That experience modification formula is completely numbers driven. There's no explanation or judgment factors in it. However, it's very important in insurance companies' kind of intangible evaluation of you as an employer. So there is value there. I can't put a number on it, but it's a strong feature in your favor when we're looking at insurance companies for proposals.
Great.
Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, okay. Thank you.
I don't know, Alan.
The deep dive.
It doesn't appear that deep dive got into the PowerPoint.
Okay, I can pull it up.
We have it printed.
I didn't, I saw it.
You don't have?
I saw it on the email, I didn't get a copy.
You know what? I think I have that file open. If you let me share the screen to me, I think I can pull it up. Give me a minute.
I'm wondering, because it's hard to see these. I'm wondering if we could get Danette or somebody else and just
let
print
me go
it
run a
off so
copy.
that Director Beerwagen can see it.
Let me go get a copy.
This is really a really good.
Yeah.
Do you wanna take a brief break while we're doing all that, or?
That'd be great.
Yeah, let's take a brief break.
Brief break while we're getting that ready.
Okay, we will be on break for 5 minutes or so. Thank you. we're back in session, and for those watching, there was a missing piece to the the PowerPoint that is called Deep Dive Coverage Comparison. So Krista Painting has put that up,
Part of the staff report.
and it is part of the staff report.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just page 2 of 2.
It's the first attachment of the staff report,
Okay.
Yes.
and it's a two-page Excel document, table, says deep dive coverage comparisons.
Right,
That's
so
what
we're
we have.
gonna go over that now with the insurance
I'm
rep.
gonna dive into the weeds.
Alan, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay,
Thank you.
head it up.
Okay, so we're taking a much more detailed look into coverages here. So let me start with the top line there, general liability. So this is, someone is injured arising out of your operation, not an employee, the public or property damage. So the SDRMA program starts with 10 million. Our Gladfilter quote starts with 11 million. That's really not significant because the higher level from SDRMA is 11 million excess of 10, and our higher level is 10 million excess of 11. You just need to get to 21. Both programs have a $5,000 deductible for liability claims. Defense costs in the SDR program are included in the limit. So if you have a big suit and you spend $2 million on defense costs, that leaves $8 million out of that 10 million for judgments. It's not usually done that way. And certainly in the private market. So the defense costs in the Gladfilter quote we have for you are in addition to the limit, doesn't reduce the limit. Okay, overhead, I'm sorry.
Over and above this.
Yes,
correct?
and 10 million on top of that, right. Okay, overhead electrical and wildfire, again, not covered SDRMA, 11 million here, plus 10, 21 million total. We discussed failure to supply water a little bit already, again, not excluded or limited in the Gladfilter program. In terms of water contamination, there's a fungal pathogens exclusion in the SDRMA form, which we would not want to have. There's no such exclusion in the Gladfilter quote.
Yeah.
Water treatment errors and omissions. So claims for liability coverage in general are triggered by an occurrence, some kind of snap, crackle, pop, and people are injured or property is damaged. But let's just say that you discover that your, let's say, chlorine supply, something wasn't done properly, and people just can't drink your water, but nothing was damaged. It just, there was just an error somehow. Again, not covered in the SDRMA program. It's a unique coverage, so I'm not faulting SDRMA like as if it were excluded, but it's just not covered. But the Gladfilter program, again, being a water treatment, a water agency program, has a specific coverage for that. Inverse condemnation I talked about before. Okay, employment practices. Both programs include employment practices liability, which is claims brought by employees arising out of discrimination, sexual harassment, wrongful termination, and similar types of claims. We have the full limits covered in both programs. No deductible in the Gladfilter program for that, and a pretty significant deductible in it's 50% of the first 200,000. So if in a big claim, call it $100,000 deductible. There's an interesting clause in the employment practices coverage that the discrimination or the wrongful employment act has to arise out of operations, and sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. So it's just an observation that I just wanted to share.
Well, it's a limitation that
Yeah,
for the district, right?
in the SDRMA form, yes. Okay. All right. Dam failure. Difficult exposure to obtain. So it would be better if the SDRMA program included it, but for instance, the Aqua JPIA program doesn't include dam failure. A lot of others don't. And again, a lot of water agencies have dams, and so the Glatfelter program is familiar. They're providing $1 million dam failure coverage for your larger dams, full limits for smaller dams. So we just kind of on a structure by structure basis have a summary. It's
So, Alan, I'm reading that the other way around. Do I have this wrong? I see 1 million for big dams, 11 million for little dams.
no, you're seeing that correctly. I might have said it wrong.
Okay, so that was my question. That it doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, okay, you're absolutely right that you would rather have more coverage for your big dams, right, than your small dams. The issue is it's kind of turning it on its head as the insurance company is uncomfortable offering the full limits on your bigger dams. So,
Yes, yeah, I guess.
so it's an area we would like more, but we don't want what's the saying? We don't want perfection to be the enemy of the good or something. So we've got a coverage improvement. We have at least a response on every dam, and so those are the best terms that were available.
So we had no coverage.
We had no coverage before, so.
Right.
I
So-
saw that too. I didn't want to diminish that fact.
So I don't want to say exactly no coverage before. There were 4 structures for which you had dam failure coverage before. One of them, you can see the Dutch Flat After Bay, third from the bottom. And then there were 3 other smaller dams that were small enough they were out of FERC jurisdiction that SDRMA did provide coverage for $1 million, but this spreadsheet only showed the FERC jurisdiction dams. That's really your bigger exposures. So.
Alan, we spoke about the $1 million coverage on the larger dams, and over time, is there an opportunity as we move forward with these carriers and they get to understand again our facilities, we've got opportunities to perhaps increase those coverage limits if necessary?
It's an issue I spend a lot of time with the Glatfelter underwriters with, and that's why we have, the full limits on some and 1 million on others. We provided the dam inspection reports, the inundation maps, and so it's possible once Glatfelter has been, the carrier had a chance to do an inspection, things like that, that we could get improved coverage. But I think it would be misleading of me to say, oh yeah, we can. It's a difficult coverage to get, and I just don't. I just believe in keeping expectations general and reasonable. So we should not count on it that we could get higher limits later, but of course we would be asking.
Will we have the same look at the dams on the $38,000 engineering look? Is that look at dams or just power production?
That's just power generation and transformers.
Okay.
So I have a question. Is it true to say that these lower coverages on the larger dams where the risk is greater, was any of that driven by the reports that we have from dam safety or any of these other, regulatory agencies where we have to, like Scott's, they've made recommendations that we do certain repairs and upgrades and so on. So the question is, are these lower limits of $1 million on these larger dams, is that reflective in part of status of the condition of them, or is it just simply a risk analysis with the amount of destruction or the amount of claims that would be if a larger one of these where to fail?
It's a great question. So almost every dam exposure, and maybe not dam by dam, but for every client that has dams, we'll have recommendations. You know, so the fact that you get recommendations, maybe you have some concrete spalling or, you know, something going on that just needs repairs. You're not unique in having recommendations like that, and there's nothing in any of your dams that was considered deficient by the underwriters that led to any adverse terms. That's completely an issue of inundation. But basically, it's like a measurement of the acre feet behind a structure and the inundation potential.
Oh, that's good to know. Right. Yeah. That was a concern.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Uh-huh.
And these underwriters saw all of our DSOD work-related reports related to the safety of our dams, which are happening on an annual basis. We're always, you know, increasing the safety of them and taking a look at them. So I think that's a really good point. Well taken and great question.
And I would add to that. I think it's phenomenal that you have a full-time employee who's your dam safety engineer. And so in addition to just the state and FERC reports, but Kian provided some of your internal reports on your processes, and those were really valuable. And I would say those were a positive contribution to having the limits that we have.
So I asked a question of Greg via email, and I presume he talked with you about it, but since we're in the public forum, I also wanted to ask it in this forum, and I don't think Director Beerwagen had the benefit of the question, and it is specifically for the overhead electrical and wildfire coverages relating to our hydro operations. Are you able to tell us what that coverage costs or as a percentage of the total? And where I'm going with that is, if we had a package and we were not a hydro producer, what would this insurance package look like versus what it looks like with these other things added in?
So, yeah, great question. In terms of the Glatfelter program's rating structure, you know, they use some basic metrics: payroll, revenue, acre feet delivered, things like that. There's no line item for the overhead electrical, wildfire at all. It's just an issue that they don't exclude the coverage, and since it's not excluded, it's included. And so, yeah, so if you were to, I mean, we wouldn't want to, but if, just to really get into the meat of your question, if we were to say, okay, what's the credit if we decided not to buy the overhead electrical, they would say, well, we could kind of think about it, but there really isn't a number in there for us to drop. So let's just say you wanted to drop physical damage coverage on a pickup. I mean, you could look it up and it's there to the dollar, right? There's no breakdown like that on those exposures. But if you don't mind, I would like to talk about costs of wildfire coverage a little bit. Are we okay? Are we okay for time? So, you know, you saw that logo splash. Yeah. So you saw that logo splash page of some of my clients, and many of my clients who have urban wildland interface is the jargon that you hear a lot, and that have transmission through either forested or brush areas, have asked about higher wildfire limits. And on top of that, I'm on a friendly basis with the risk manager for SMUD, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Transmission Agency in Northern California, NCPA, and there's a good kind of collaborative relationship of, hey, what are you hearing on wildfire and what are you doing? And so I'm closely aware of the market for wildfire and what it costs. And so underwriters look at the climate, and I mean climate in both terms: the legal climate in California with inverse condemnation legal basis that damage just has to arise out of your equipment. There does not need to be any negligence involved. It's just if it arises out of your equipment, you are responsible for the bills. So that makes underwriters very nervous. And then, you know, we've just had this unprecedented series of wildfire losses in the state and billions of dollars in damages. And so one of the leading underwriters for higher liability limits, one of our clients was looking for, they're currently carrying $35 million of liability coverage. They wanted to see if they could get another 25 million above that, and especially for the wildfire exposure. And so a very typical response from one underwriter who's like the first underwriter you would go to was, you know, we don't think it's a matter of if there's going to be a loss. We think there will be a loss. We think it'll be catastrophic. We think it'll happen about every 10 years. So we're going to charge 10% of the limit. So if you wanted $25 million of coverage, it'd be $2.5 million. And it's a very difficult coverage to get. And again, there's not a lot that an underwriter can do to say, well, I think that this account is more dangerous than this account, because it's just subject to the whims of weather and this difficult legal environment. So it's very difficult and very expensive. If you were to, it's just not possible to buy it, but if you're looking for how the market would value it, that's a pretty good number.
Well, that's helpful.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
I have a question about wildfire. Are we covering a lightning fire that damages our stuff, or one that we start from our electrical overhead?
Oh, those are good questions.
Okay.
Which wildfire are we talking about here?
Okay, so this topic is wildfire liability. So tree falls on your line, knocks it down, we start a fire, and it, you know, spreads and causes damage. So this is liability for a fire you start that damages property of other people.
Okay, this typically used to be called an act of God when the tree fell down. Nobody
Yeah.
would start the fire, but because we have an overhead electrical line that if you knock down, it starts a fire.
Right, and
Right.
and then this inverse condemnation rule in California means it doesn't matter if the clearance in your path where your transmission line goes was adequate and that just happened to be a tall tree, or that it was, you know, 80-mile-an-hour winds. None of that matters. There's no position for you to use negligent or you know, prudence as a defense. It's, if it happened to be caused by your equipment, you are responsible for the damages based on the inverse condemnation theory that's the present rule of law in California.
There's a reason why vegetation management
Exists.
is taking over.
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
Very important. Very
And
important.
those are ongoing operations, which you have been apprised to as well. So,
Yeah,
So
very
not
important.
not having, following the news and what happened in the state, and not knowing, having experience with dealing with this stuff, these numbers, I won't say they don't mean anything to me. You know, are they adequate? Okay, where do they line up in a degree of good coverage or minimum coverage or something like that, or do they?
Good question.
For the wildfire part.
Well,
We didn't have it.
I won't try to be sarcastic, but when on some catastrophic exposures like wildfire, you know, it's like asking how high is up. Could PG&E
Yeah, okay.
ever anticipate?
You can be sarcastic, that's all right. I like
No.
it. I like it.
Where I'm going is, could PG&E ever anticipate in their wildest dreams that they would have a $10 billion wildfire loss? You know, it's just boggling. So I think we have to be careful making these recommendations, but if you can get the best coverage available at what are the reasonable like price points or limit points, 21 million is like a super logical limit for you because it's driven by Cal ISO and your large generator interconnection agreements.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot or try to go there, okay? It was
No, it's a great, I mean, it's a great question, and I love my job, and I could talk to you for an hour about wildfire. We've got the time, so.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I like I said, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but having,
No,
because we're treading new territory, all of us are on that front.
yeah.
That's, at least we have a basis. We have a good basis to start with. We have insurance where we didn't before. So that's a good thing.
And again, the way this policy is written, your defense costs are in addition to the limit. So, you know, it's better than not having coverage.
Right.
So, okay. So we talked about dam failure, pollution. I would say almost identical. You have $1 million of pollution in the GLAP filter proposal. You have $1 million with SDRMA. The SDRMA pollution limit is shared with other SDRMA members, so it could be the case that not all of that would be available to you at the time of a loss.
Now, I had a real concern about this pollution, these limits. They seem, $1 million seems like almost like having no insurance to me because, you know, but help me walk us through, please, an example of what would be, we polluted our waters, or you know, a truck slides off the road and, you know.
So let's say that
goes into the watershed and la 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 la.
Yeah, you could have a service truck wreck and spill fuel or chemical that needs to be cleaned up. You use some, herbicides and other treatment chemicals related to some of your equipment management, canal clearing, and things like that. And so you have an accident that results in a spill, and then it causes damage to other parties' property. That's the claim. We have other. We can show you as a follow-up item. With Greg, I can show you options for higher limits for pollution exposures.
I don't know. I want to defer to staff, but it seems like $1 million for pollution is very slight. I mean, in my world, in the commercial real estate world,
Goes fast.
It would go fast.
it goes very fast. And if you got to have folks in white suits come out, it's just going like that. And that doesn't take into account, whatever liability you have down the road or downstream to the homeowners who may have had whatever damages they perceived and personal liability and all of that. It can get really expensive really quickly.
Right. Well, it's something that, Alan, we could look at. I mean, I think, I'd like to look at industry standard at the moment, right?
Yeah,
Like,
industry standard is.
what are other industry standard elements according to this? We know that at SDRMA, we had roughly $1 million.
Right.
It's something we could certainly look at, and as we move forward, we can, right now, we've got the quotes based on this, but, I could bring that back to this meeting, on another date in terms of looking at other policies and other sister agencies and what is their specific to pollution. Because I think, Alan, would other general liability, cover certain elements of
That's what I was wondering.
damage to a property or an asset? So you got the pollution itself,
Right.
and then you've got damage to
Downstream,
private
whatever.
something,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
so we have to think about that. It might
I'll-
cover both ways.
Yeah, let me follow up with you on that one, Greg. And Greg and directors, if we're fortunate enough to have a long relationship, you're going to find that I'm pretty direct on things and don't try to fluff things. We have been working so hard, and your staff has been working so hard on getting the broader program put together, that on things like, in this case, should we consider 3 million limits as a pollution option? we have just not had the time to flesh those out as much as I would like to, were we working together on an ongoing basis. So it's nothing more than that. And so I think it's a great idea to look at options.
I get that, and I really appreciate the work that you've all done, because I know this was a big, big lift for everybody. But I think that the pollution coverage stood out to me, and then there's one other one we'll get down to later that was one that we may want to think about, you know, down the road. I'm not saying it would have to be changed in this package.
Right, yeah. Okay. Move on to the next one, Alan.
Yeah, next page. Okay, cyber coverages, big exposures, big growth in cyber claims, and so let me touch on that. So in the SDRMA program, there's a $2 million limit for cyber claims. That is an aggregate limitation, an aggregate limit for all SDRMA members. So if another SDRMA member had a $500,000 cyber claim, there would be $1.5 million remaining for all the other SDRMA members. So the proposal we have, $1 million limit. We have clients that carry much higher cyber limits, and we do a lot of cyber coverage, and I'd be happy to look at more options for you. There was a point, a partner of mine in Houston and I placed the APPA endorsed cyber program for APPA members through their Hometown Connections program. I have a comment there on the SDRMA coverage, and there's a limitation in the cyber coverage saying it's limited to devices for the purpose of processing data. And for you, a big cyber exposure is for industrial control systems, and not just people's computers, but you have SCADA systems, you have, chemical injection systems that are, run with automated controls. And so we look for coverage to include industrial control systems. And I'm not saying that devices for purpose of processing data limits that. I don't quite know what it means, but it jumped out at me. So just an observation. Okay, data and network liability. So what that is for is you reach a list of customers and it has their addresses, maybe if they pay by credit card, it has credit card numbers. You have certain liabilities, to provide them credit monitoring, depending on what type of information was lost, you have a notification obligation. Current numbers are, it's usually about $200 a record in terms of what it ends up costing in a network liability claim. Again, we could look at higher options for you as we move forward together. A couple of coverage there. Fraudulent instruction is an issue we see a lot of claims on. And so the claim there is Kean Summers sends an email to Marvin Davis, says, hey, please wire $35,000 to X Engineering. They got it, they need it because they're doing this work for us. Marvin sends the money, runs into Kean the next day, says, hey, did that wire go through? And Kean says, what wire? And it turned out the whole thing was a spoof and you set money off. We have claims like that, unfortunately, all the time. So in our program, you have the Gladfelter quote, you have $250,000 for that. Funds transfer fraud is similar, but it's would be by an internal actor as opposed to an external actor. Cyber extortion is one area that I wish we had higher limits, and we can work on an option on that. But the claim there is you get an email that says, hey, we have control of your system. We need you to send, $10,000 in Bitcoin to us or we'll corrupt all your data. We see claims like that all the time. What's interesting is the crisis management component is as important or more than the actual dollar amount of the claim, meaning we've had multiple claims with this, and what happens generally is within an hour if we're notified, there will be a team talking to the client. Okay, let us get into your system. Let's see what's locked down. Let's see what's not. They will have Bitcoin to deliver. They'll know how to deliver Bitcoin and get keys to unlock systems. And it's actually a phenomenal process to see. It's fascinating. But I would like to see a higher cyber extortion limit for you there. But again, kind of the same issue as my pollution question. I was not able to just get every single thing I would like to have improved put together for you on the time we had.
Yeah, that was my other question, like, why was that so dramatically different?
Dramatically different, yes.
Yeah, and again, we may be able to increase that with Glatfelter, or it may be that we just carve out the cyber from Glatfelter completely and write a separate cyber program. And there are a lot of options.
So, Alan, is this just their policy? Is that why that's limited to bundle?
Yeah, that was kind of their standard offerings, and there's so many other things about the Glatfelter program that were, really superior, that we're looking at it kind of in its entirety. But I didn't want to let that one get past any of us. That's an area I would like to bring you better, higher limits.
Okay.
Little lower deductible in the Glatfelter proposal than SDRMA's proposal. Okay, auto, not to minimize it, but auto's auto. It's pretty straightforward. You have a list of vehicles, liabilities included. There's no deductible in the Glatfelter auto liability premium, and there's $5,000 in SDRMA. I don't really consider that to be material. Physical damage, both programs, $5,000 deductible.
Is that per $5,000 per incident, or $5,000 per vehicle, or $5,000 per year?
It'd just be per accident. So
Per accident.
a wreck, a fire, a vandalism. Yeah, each on auto, each claim is just going to be its own claim, and it'd be $5,000 deductible. Okay, this excess liability, and again, it's in the headings, we're calling it 10 million, excess of 10 million, and
Yeah, I was that was 100 million.
I'll just touch on this. The total is 21 million. The SDRMA base policy is 10 million, and then you have an $11 million policy over that to get to 21. With the Glatfelter proposal, there's $1 million and then $10 million. So with Allied World, we only needed 10 million, excess of 11 million to get to 21. Are you following me on the math on that?
I am, yes.
Okay. So interesting thing on that excess liability policy. So excess liability underwriters are used to being excess over coverage provided by an insurance company. That sounds pretty basic, but SDRMA is not an insurance company. They're not rated by AM Best. They are not using the standard insurance company forms. And so because of that, the excess policy that you've been buying has a lot of things that they have done just to try to digest the fact that they're not pricing coverage over an insurance company like they're used to. So for example, let's just say that you have multiple claims and you start invading the aggregate limits provided by one of the underlying policies. Then and let's say you have 3 general liability claims for, $2 million, then you would have less coverage available in the first umbrella. Well, the 10x of 10 with SDRMA just doesn't drop down. It creates a gap for a second claim between the primary SDRMA coverage and that umbrella. And with the Allied World quote over Glatfelter, it just ties together better when there's a large claim involving all the policies. So the Allied World policy includes public officials liability. So that's on the primarily for the board, but it would include employees too of an error or omission. That, again, what you have now does not include public officials. Again, since overhead electrical and wildfire would not be covered on the underlying policy, they're not covered on the excess policy with the SDRMA program. It's included in the Allied World program. So you have $21 million coverage of overhead electrical and wildfire. And then again, so with the 10 million excess of, the 11 million excess of 10 with SDRMA, there's no coverage for failure to supply water. There is in the Allied World, that amount, that limit, the 10x of 10 does require damage to NID equipment, but we at least have it instead of not having it. The deductibles for the non-hydro property, the deductible that Gladfelter's quoting, their price point is higher than the SDRMA deductible was, 50,000 instead of 25. Okay, on the hydroelectric property, deductibles are higher with the Zurich, Aegis, Munich, London program than were on the policy with SDRMA. It was $25,000 for fire versus $100,000 in the proposal I'm bringing. $350,000 for machinery breakdown, the same as, again, $350,000 for us. So at inception, with the program we're presenting, and this is directly tied to not having an insurance company engineering report, some of the deductibles on generators are going to be quite high. Don't want to try to minimize that. So it'd be $350,000 except for $1 million Scott's Flat, Combi North and South, Bowman, 2 million Rollins, 3 million Dutch Flat, 5 million Chicago Park. So those are high. Zurich Risk Engineering is going to visit the largest plants. They'll meet with your staff. They'll make recommendations. And when those recommendations are addressed, those deductibles will automatically revert to $350,000. So, and that's one of those issues. It's like the hump to get over, that not having engineering available is just a burden on the placement of the hydro machinery breakdown. That's only for generators, not for transformers. Yes.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt real quick. Kind of to hit that point home though, the deductibles listed here by each individual power plant does not necessarily reflect the condition of the equipment currently at the plants. This is based on the fact that we don't have a risk engineer analysis by the carrier. So they're assuming worst case scenario.
So it's based on the size of the plant or?
Yeah, these numbers are based on the capacity of the plant.
Capacity.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, but I just want to be clear that these numbers, and after the analysis and after the recommendations that are created and done, that we say, more than likely, most likely, do revert to standard $350,000 deductible. Right. That's not to say that there's going to be $3 million worth of repairs to be done on Scott Flat, right, or Chicago Park.
Well, it's sort of like the past question on the dam safety stuff. It's like, right?
Yeah.
It isn't a reflection of the condition. It's a reflection of just where we are.
You're right. Those numbers are just based on the generation megawatt capacity.
Right.
And again, that's for the generators only. Transformers aren't facing that limitation. A blade, wouldn't be facing that limitation.
Okay,
And again, we don't have to ask Zurich, you know, okay, we've done our repairs. It's when we've completed the recommendations, coverage will revert to 350,000. They've committed to that.
Okay. That's
I mean, the deductible.
So here's a what if. So what if they find, they do a study and they say, okay, Chicago Park is in bad shape? Does that not revert until it gets fixed, or how's that work?
Well, they're going to make recommendations, and if that reversion back to 350 will be when the recommendations are completed. And that's, unfortunately, it kind of brings us back to the same place. Since we don't have an engineering report, we don't know what those recommendations would be. It's just the situation that we find ourselves in, with underwriters kind of having to work blind.
Okay.
Okey-doke.
Okay, scroll down a little bit. So employee theft, again, $1 million with SDRMA program for most coverages, $1 million for employee theft, $500,000 for forgery, computer fraud, funds transfer, fraud, 250 versus 75 for fraudulent impersonation. So there's some coverages lower, some coverages higher. This is another area where we can look at options with Greg. We can look at deleting the crime from this policy, write just a standalone crime policy, just as continuing work.
Greg, can you comment, if you know, have we ever had employee theft here that's material? I mean, other than taking a hat or whatever, I mean, you know. Or, I mean, like a truck or something, you know.
You know, none to my knowledge.
That's kind of what I was
don't know.
sensing, is
Yeah.
that this is not a problem in this district, not that it couldn't
Sure.
happen, but
Sure.
It's not an ongoing problem.
it's not a,
You know, it's nothing that's risen to the indication that I've seen, but I wouldn't, you know, I can't say that it hasn't happened or that it wouldn't, but at the moment, I can't think of an example that would make, you know,
How about the?
that would rise to the $500,000 level.
How about the other categories? Forgery, fraud.
Fraudulent impersonation,
Yeah, all that stuff.
no.
No,
I mean, these are, you know, you never know what you don't know, but
that's true.
but I mean, it's wonderful that they're included with all this, that it's there, right? Hopefully, like any insurance program, you hope you never use it,
Right.
right?
And then the last line, mobile equipment, it's kind of mobile equipment, right? You have a schedule, you have a big loader, and it's insured for its value. Again, SDRMA's deductible is $25,000. The Glatfelter deductible is $1,000. But again, $25,000 is a lot more than $1,000. But when you look at all the other issues, really, it's kind of not really a material difference compared to the liability issues that we talked about.
Seems kind of de minimis to me, I wasn't really
Yes, you're right.
Does this cover all the construction equipment, everything we take everywhere? When did we say mobile?
Mobile equipment, maybe
This
give us
is
an
just
example.
we're not talking about cell phone, we're talking about.
No, Alan is,
Um,
give an example of the mobile
A backhoe,
Okay, that's what I thought.
yeah.
That was my question.
trailers,
Right.
backhoes.
All that, okay.
So
Thank you.
things with wheels that are not an automobile.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Good.
Okay,
At the end of the deep dive.
that I think,
Well, I have talked a lot for a long time, but I'm happy to take questions and address anything anyone has.
thank you very much, Alan. So we've kind of asked questions as we've gone through. Is there anything, that we haven't necessarily covered that you're interested in discussing or talking about, or we have a few members of the public online?
Well, I want to summarize the three areas that I had concerns and I understand it may not be addressed here, but for the future, and that was the potential for the loss of income, pollution, and cyber. And so I would like to see something done, you know, I don't know, months or whatever, 6 months. I don't know what the time frame is.
Follow up on those.
Yeah, those would be
Yeah.
follow-up items for different or greater coverage packages for the district. And other than that, I'm so grateful to you, Alan, and to you, Greg, and to all of our staff who've put all this time. This was a heavy lift, and boy, you guys pulled it off, it seems to me.
Well, for me, it's really an honor. I love my job. You don't need to be grateful to me. It's been a terrific opportunity. It's funny, when Greg just first got the notice from SDRMA, he started calling around, and I had 2 clients say, "Hey, you need to talk to Greg Jones." Just calling around, he found 2 clients of mine. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity where I would say, if you're going to be thankful, your staff has worked so hard, and I haven't gotten any pushback. If it said, "Kian, you're going to hate to hear from me, but can I have blah, 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 blah," and, you know, it would just come back. And Greg in the same way. And Greg and I, we don't even have to introduce each other. It's just, "Hi, Greg. Hi, Alice, Greg. Okay, hey, what's going on?" But
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for the support I got from staff. One of our comments in our request for proposals is like, "What information are you going to need?" And my answer, I think the first sentence of the answer was, "The most important thing I'm going to need is staff time." And I don't know if staff really knew what I was getting them into, but I'm just very grateful for the support I've gotten.
Well, should we take some public comment or questions?
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, you want to instruct us to raise a hand, a star 9?
Star 9 or on their computer.
Okay.
Star 9.
It's on the phone.
So this is the time when folks have questions that you should raise your hand.
If you're in a handheld, star 9, otherwise press raise your hand.
Star 9, if you're on the line.
See, I can't, just for the public purposes, I can't even see who's online. I can't see that from here.
Right, nobody's raising their hand.
Okay. Well, with no questions, then, we'll turn it back to you, Greg, and.
Okay, well, I really appreciate it. Thank you, board members, for going through this. Thank you, Alan, as well, for this. I'm
We do need
assuming,
the word action, right? I mean,
I
committee action.
I just need I'm assuming we're advancing this recommendation as in the packet to the board of directors. Well, it's already on the board agenda item for Wednesday, so,
Right.
Yeah, we
so
can
this,
let them know.
this is a
Well, but we
formality.
really took a deep dive
No,
here
we
for
did.
2 hours, so.
Yeah, we did.
I will inform the board on Wednesday that we
Yeah.
have had this meeting, and and I'm assuming you will too. So we'll bring this forth to the board on Wednesday, morning, and, I really appreciate your time and thoughts on this. And Alan, thank you very much, and we'll see you.
For the record, can we confirm and hear that there is a recommendation?
You don't want just on a thumbs up?
Oh,
Yeah, I did thumbs up.
okay, I didn't.
Yeah, I was behind you, you didn't
Okay,
say.
so thumbs up
Yes.
was the
Yes, please
recommendation.
advance to the board. What's our recommendation to proceed?
To proceed.
With a follow-up on the 3 items,
On the
the
3
pollution, the cyber, and the loss of income.
Right.
items. And we'll look for that as we seek to re-engage the next, fiscal years.
In the next cycle, yeah,
Yeah.
or whatever, but,
Or sooner, if we
or
can.
sooner. You know, pollution coverage seems really light. That
Sure.
was the one that I think we could, anyway,
Okay.
we can talk about it more. But thank you so much,
Okay.
Alan.
Well, with that, we'll
Thank you, Alan.
we'll
You're
close
welcome.
the,
It's nice to get to meet you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Wonderful, thank you.